Hey, what's up, everybody? And welcome to your Monday edition of the Post Up with David Grubb here on Boot Crew Media. I, of course, am David Grubb. Hope you had a good weekend. New week, new episode. So let's get things going. Plenty to talk about after the first big trade of the NBA offseason. What are the implications for the Pelicans? And we'll also talk about the NBA draft and see if the sands are shifting as far as where the Pelicans are going to go. We'll also talk about Trey Murphy and CJ McCollum and how this offseason now impacts their futures with the Pelicans. So we got plenty to talk about. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share, and comment below as you see fit. Make sure you give me your feedback. All right, let's start with that Desmond Bane trade. Of course, the Memphis Grizzlies over the past weekend made this trade with the Orlando Magic, that where the Magic get Desmond Bane, who scored 19 points a game for the for the Grizzlies last year, shooting about 39%. The Grizzlies, in return, get Contavious Caldwell Pope, two-time champion. You get him from, champion with the Lakers, champion with the Nuggets. They also get the Magic's first round pick, one of the Magic's first round picks in this draft, the 16th pick. They get Cole Anthony as well, the backup point guard, who I think is going into the final year of his contract, if I'm not mistaken. They also get first round picks in 2026, 2028, and 2030, and then a first round pick swap in 2029. So, what is the immediate impact here? Number one, if the Pelicans are interested in getting John Morant and making that type of trade, the value certainly, if Desmond Bane is getting 4 picks and 2 players, then the John Morant deal would have to be considerable. I think you would have to include either Trey Murphy or Herb Jones if you're trying to prod John Morant away from the Grizzlies, and you'd have to give up multiple picks. The Pelicans have the picks. The question is, do they want to give up one of those players? We shall see. But also, it seems like a John Morant trade maybe isn't imminent, with their front office, with Memphis's front office basically saying that they want to keep Jaren Jackson Jr. And John Morant, on the roster. So it seems like they're committed to building around those two, at least for the short term. I think a lot of that is dependent on what Jaren Jackson Jr. decides. He can be offered an extension, but it's because he didn't get make an All NBA team last season. The difference is pretty considerable. He thought he was going to make one of the teams. He finished, I think, 17th in voting, just missing out on making the top 15. So because of that, he's only eligible for like a $160 million max compared to the 300 plus $1 million super max he would have been eligible for had he made an All NBA team. So there's a lot of thought that he's going to try to make an All NBA team this year, improve his value, and then become an unrestricted free agent at the end of this season. If that's the case, if it becomes apparent that he doesn't intend to re-sign with Memphis, or if the cost just looks like it's going to be too much, then maybe you can revisit the John Morant trade. But it doesn't feel like right now, unless something dramatic happens, that the Grizzlies are interested in moving off of Ja, because what they've done is they've supplemented their backcourt. You have your John Morant insurance and Cole Anthony. Of course, he's not on the level of player that John Morant is, but you have a capable uh, point guard to fill in when Ja isn't around. And that's something they haven't had since Tyus Jones left. Then you add in Contavious Caldwell Pope, who's a little bit older, 32 years old, but this is a guy who's been very durable. He's averaged 75 games a season over the last 7 seasons. He can shoot the ball. He shot it poorly last year with Orlando. So you're hoping for a bounce back season if you're Memphis. But over the last 7 seasons, he's averaging 38.4% from 3-point range. So they boosted themselves that way. The big question is about the picks, and there's a question of whether Memphis, um, fleeced Orlando in this deal by getting those picks. But when you think about it, if Orlando is going to consistently be in the top 4 in the East, which is what this deal is intended to do for them, and Desmond Bane is a guy who could be an all-star in the Eastern Conference, a guy whose career is shooting around 40% from three. Last year was a down year, and he shot 39% from three. So if you're taking Desmond Bane, you're thinking you're going to putting him alongside Franz Wagner, who averaged like 25 points per game in the playoffs, and you put him with Paolo Banchero, who averaged something like 29 points per game in the playoffs. So you're getting 54 points from those guys. If you're getting another 20 from Desmond Bane, and you see the improvement from the rest of that roster, then the Magic could be a formidable team in the top of the East, and those picks become late first rounders at best. If that's the case, then Memphis is likely using those picks to get better. They're giving them out to somebody else in order to secure more talent to put around Ja and Jaren Jackson, or they're using those picks to replace one of those two guys if they decide to move them. But it doesn't feel like another move is imminent for those guys. This is a division now where there's an arms race going on. Certainly, divisions don't have the weight that they used to, and you don't try to consider too much about divisions in the league, but they are still the team that you're going to play the most. Those are still the teams that you're going to face most often during the regular season. And you're looking at a division now that has retooled itself pretty well. The Memphis Grizzlies with this move, who I think, we'll see how things pan out, but they're not worse after this deal, and we'll see how they draft and these things go along. But they're not worse. They've made a move. We'll see how the new coach pans out. He led the team into the playoffs, and they weren't successful there. But does he pan out in his first full year? We shall see. But the rest of the division, you have Houston mentioned as one of the three front runners to get Kevin Durant. That would be a major addition for a team that finished second in the Western Conference last season. That the only real weakness they've had is leadership and outside scoring. Kevin Durant would provide the outside scoring. I don't know how much of a leader he is in the locker room. They're just, differing ideas about that. But he certainly is still one of the elite scorers in the NBA, both in terms of points produced and his efficiency. If you're adding that to a Houston team that can play defense, you can add it to a Houston team that's going to be tough. You add that to a Houston team that has athleticism on the perimeter and on the interior, that has a solid interior player in Alperen Sengun, that has re-signed Steven Adams to continue, you know, their front court strength and that up front. So that Houston team is not going anywhere. Obviously, San Antonio and Dallas at the top two picks in the NBA draft. San Antonio 2, Dallas at 1. So they're going to add more talent to what are pretty strong cores that they have. If Dallas is healthy, if they can get healthy, they have an impressive front court with Cooper Flagg, Anthony Davis, Derek Lively. We'll see how that group matures. We'll see what the Jaden Hardy is still in their backcourt, somebody that I've mentioned as the Pelicans maybe possibly targeting in a deal if they get a deal done. Either they're part of a 3-team deal that includes the Mavericks. And then, of course, San Antonio building around Victor Wembanyama and then having De'Aaron Fox for a full season. And they're likely to either add a really good player in this draft, or if they trade out of that number 2 spot, which has also been discussed, then you wonder who they're adding on top of Stephon Castle, who won Rookie of the Year last year, Victor Wembanyama, who won the year before. You see which one of their young players that they keep around, and whether it's Jeremy Sohan or whether it's Keldon Johnson, whomever they want to keep to pair with those two, and then you add that pick if it's a Dylan Harper, if it's whomever. The Spurs are going to be better next season. So the Pelicans can't simply rely on health to be better. They've got to make some types of moves this offseason in order to supplement their talent. And if they are consistent in the idea that they're going to build around Zion Williamson, then that really impacts the players we're about to talk about. As we move to Trey Murphy, and you have to wonder now, what is Trey Murphy's value if Desmond Bane is worth 2 players and 4 first-round picks? If Desmond Bane, who is a very good player, but also has his share of injury concerns, has missed games over the last couple seasons, who's not as tall as Trey, as consistent a shooter, but maybe not the full upside that Trey has. Is it time to move off of Trey Murphy? I'm asking the question because I think these are difficult questions to answer, and this is why NBA executives make the money that they make, because the organization has put itself and painted itself kind of into a corner with the timing of everything that's happened. When you released David Griffin when you did, after you've already extended Trey, you made the Brandon Ingram trade late, by all accounts. You waited too long to pull the trigger on that deal. You ended a really bad season with most of your core players on the sidelines, if not all of your core players. The only one who was healthy at the end really was CJ McCollum, and he got some injury absences at the end. But when you look at the team, only CJ was pretty much around by the end of the season. Guys had gotten hurt, checked out. for one reason or another. So you come into this season now and you have two things competing with each other. You have still the memories of the 49 win season and people thinking that that is a area that the Pelicans could get back to. Then you have last season, which showed that you weren't as deep as you thought you were, that some of these pieces may not fit together, and that you made a mistake in gutting your defense in the previous offseason for DeJounte Murray. Even if Murray is healthy last season and he doesn't get hurt, the Pelicans wouldn't have been a good defensive team. So what are you doing this offseason? If you're building around Zion Williamson, what are the types of players you have to have? And are you setting yourself up for long-term failure by making short-term deals? For Trey Murphy, according to reports, and I don't know how much I want to take these reports seriously, but according to reports, the Pelicans are reportedly asking for a veteran who can contribute in the playoffs, one young prospect, and multiple first-round picks. Now, I don't know if that's the exact lineup you're going to get, but it seems that's in accordance for what the value that Memphis got for Desmond Bane. It's in accordance to what the value that the Brooklyn Nets got for Mikal Bridges. Okay, so if that's the case, then I think that is the area that Trey Murphy's value is going to traffic in is multiple first rounders, and you're going to have to get some talent in return, certainly to match that $30 million salary of Trey's. If that's the case, is now the best time to do it? It's always better to move players early in their deals rather than late because that's when your leverage exists. But you just extended this guy. He is a homegrown talent. He's a 20-point per game scorer. He's an elite shooter. He's finishing better than he has ever in his career, and he's passing the basketball better and better each year. Can you afford to let that guy go? And I think that that's tied directly to the question of Herb Jones's value, because when you look at Trey, and there are multiple teams, 4 or 5 teams that have been mentioned as potential teams that want to go after Trey, though I would imagine the list is longer than that, the teams that would like to have Trey. It's just, do they have the assets to get Trey? I think the same is the case for Herb Jones. When you look at Herb Jones, and you put him and Trey together, came in the same rookie class. Herb is obviously a little bit older than Trey, but you're talking both of these guys are high-level role players who contribute to winning, and they're both homegrown talents who have strong ties with the fan base. I think if you asked most fans, if you came up and you said you were trading Zion Williamson, they'd be more okay with that than trading Herb Jones or Trey Murphy. And we kind of discussed this last night on the show. We kind of got into a debate over the Herb Jones's value in particular, because I think that I understand the case that if Herb Jones, you talk about a guy who's going to be a unrestricted free agent after the 2026-27 season, which is just 2 years away, obviously. If Herb is a free agent, what does the cost of extending him look like? Do you have to take him up to $20+ million? And if that's the case, does that make sense on a team where you're paying Zion 30+, when you're playing Trey 30+, when you're paying potentially another player $30+ million in that year? If you're keeping DeJounte Murray, he's getting that money, or somebody else is. If you're not winning, it doesn't make any sense. No, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make it, but I think right now in this offseason, you have other priorities that you have to put ahead of either trading Trey Murphy or Herb Jones. If you get the Godfather deal that you can't refuse, then you go ahead and make it. I'm sorry. That's just the way the business goes, and folks will just have to eat that. But I think that for Joe Dumars, who needs a PR win early, there are deals that could make this team better without giving away those two guys, either one of them early. Do I think they're untouchable? No, nobody's untouchable. Do I think they're untradeable? No, they're probably both very tradable. I think that the interest for Herb Jones is maybe even higher than Trey, because you have to give up less. And if you're a really good team, Herb Jones on a $15 million deal makes a lot of sense to you. And you've seen teams be able to look. You talk about, let's say, a Miles Turner, who has a very team-friendly deal right now. I think he's paid about $19 million as the starting center for the Pacers. He's a elite or a high-level role player. He's not your main guy. They thought he could grow into that. He just never did. He is what he is. I think that if you look at the progression of Herb Jones and Trey Murphy, whereas Trey is becoming one of the scorers that teams have to fear. We talked about, in previous episodes about how his numbers have advanced. His scoring volume continues to increase. His number of 20-point games, his number of 30-point games, his explosions for 40. They have gotten, as he gets more playing time, he gets more pronounced with his scoring. And he's learning how to deal with being the primary option when other guys are out. He's learning how to create plays for his teammates. The Pelicans don't have a lot of guys who can do that. So if you take Trey Murphy away now and you don't secure that type of player this offseason, you're really hampering this offense. And it's going to have to rely on its offense this year to get wins because you cannot retool this entire defense in one offseason. So if the Pelicans are trying to win games this year, if that's the goal, then getting rid of Trey Murphy right now doesn't make sense. Neither does Herb Jones, because those are the two players throughout Zion Williamson's career in New Orleans who have played the best with him. Now, if things go badly, and if the Pelicans can't win during this regular season, if they look like they're just spinning their tires and not really going anywhere, then at that point, I think fans will be okay with making deals to reorganize the team. They're okay with a fire sale. They're okay with moving on from guys that they may really like. That'll hurt. Fans love players. They become attached to them. It'll hurt if you have to trade Trey Murphy. It'll hurt if you got to trade Herb Jones. But I think either one of those moves being the first move that Joe Dumars makes puts a lot of pressure on this front office. That puts a lot of pressure on the front office to win the deals early. And I think that that's a bad place to be in if you're Joe Dumars this early in your tenure with the Pelicans, to have to go out and be like, we've made these deals to get rid of these fan favorites early on, and you don't win, or those players don't have an immediate return, then people will lose confidence early. Is that a reason to not make a good move? No, it isn't. So if the best move comes along, you can't avoid making that move. You realize the value is just too high, then go ahead and make it. But I think if there are options, if you can build without trading Trey and Herb today in this offseason, then I think those are the options that the Pelicans are more likely to explore. I just can't imagine them giving up on those guys right now when they're both under relatively team-friendly deals. Though, yes, their value to trade is probably higher today in the offseason than it'll be in the regular season. I agree that that's a possibility, and it may be even a stronger than 50% chance that that's true. I think for Herb in particular, his value is higher right now. I think Trey's value doesn't really diminish because of the skill set that he has, but I think for Herb, the return is likely higher right now than it would be during the season, unless a team is really in need of a perimeter defender and a guy who makes your team better. Because I think that that's the main thing that you look at is, do guys not just put up numbers, but they make your team better? And I think both Trey and Herb right now make the Pelicans better. So Trey's value is high, Herb's value is high, and the Pelicans should be interested in finding out what's out there. But that doesn't mean you have to make a deal. We just talked about the Orlando Magic's deal with Desmond Bane, and with Orlando out of the picture, that changes the landscape for a potential CJ McCollum deal, because it's often been talked about that Orlando was a great fit for CJ. I put up proposed trades with Orlando for CJ. It doesn't seem like that's a destination now. So where are the potential fits for CJ McCollum? And I think you have to look, if you're looking in the Eastern Conference, the teams that you're looking at are a team like Miami, which could always use outside shooting and maybe wants to shed some veteran salary that they're not particularly in love with. I think you're looking at Philadelphia, which has a good backcourt already, but is CJ, maybe you're adding another veteran because you do have, if they're adding two rookies this year, that means they'll have two players on their first contracts. You've just given Tyrese Maxey's deal. You've given Paul George's deal. You've given Joel Embiid his money. Do you have the kind of money that it takes to bring in a CJ McCollum? I mean, obviously, you'd have to take some of those young players that Philly had at the end of the season and maybe find a diamond in the rough there. But I think the value that you're trying to get from CJ is any picks that you can get, as well as young players. But I don't think you're in as dire need for talent from a CJ deal as you are for moving off that contract and trying to get some picks in return. If it's a bunch of seconds, if it's a conditional first, whatever it is, I think that it's important for the Pelicans to be able to get that financial flexibility of getting his deal. But there's also a question of whether or not CJ is more valuable to the Pelicans now than he is for someone else. And should the Pelicans allow his contract to expire after the season and just take that 30 million plus in savings? And I think that that's an option to consider, because if the Pelicans don't secure shooting this offseason and the main two shooters you have are still CJ and Trey, then the Pelicans could go into the season still with CJ McCollum and looking for a trade deadline deal. And it kind of feels like, and I think that there's fans probably just rubbing their eyes at this point and thinking about, how do we end up in this circumstance? But as aggressive as we've heard the Pelicans are thinking about being, whether it's moving up in this draft or putting everybody up for potential trade, you have to also understand that there's a lot of posturing here too, where the Pelicans are going to put out the fact that they are looking for partners to move some of their talent. But really what they're doing is gauging interest now for Joe Dumars, who still has not seen this team play in one game together. Now, you, me, and other folks in the front office who are now all gone may have had their evaluations and recommendations for what they wanted to do with this team. If they were going to blow it up, if David Griffin had a plan to really reshape this roster, I don't know. But I think for Joe Dumars, he doesn't want to make rash decisions. He wants to be aggressive. It feels like that's been his nature. When you look at his transaction sheet from across his career with the Pistons, I think the same is true of Troy Weaver, who consistently makes moves on draft day to either acquire additional picks or move talent. So I think both of those guys want to be proactive in making moves this offseason, but I also think there's a bit of wariness on their parts to kind of figure out what they have and what they want to do with it. And if you take a little bit less value, and this is what I'm thinking they may be thinking, and don't take any of this as definite. But what I'm saying is, if you're thinking that the slight trade-off in value, if decreasing a player's value by a little bit is worth knowing whether this team, whether it's pieces of this team need to be saved or none of this team needs to be saved, or if all of this team can be salvaged in some way, whatever the way that the pendulum swings. If that's the case, then I also understand not wanting to stand pat, but evaluate a certain group of players to find out how they work and then make my move later on. That may not be the most advantageous position for the Pelicans today, but I think all of these things are bets. None of us know what the future is going to be. So you're placing your best possible bet based on the information that you have available to you. And I think that the information that the Pelicans are putting into the computer right now, if you're Joe Dumars, is you have one really talented player, and you see what that means in the playoffs. Do you have a guy who can get his own bucket whenever he wants to? And for as limited as folks want to call Zion Williamson's game, it's pretty hard to stop that dude when he's going downhill. Teams want to, and there are teams that have been more successful than others at creating that wall and making it difficult for Zion to get downhill. But more often than not, he's been able to get through whatever defenses have been placed in front of him and get to the bucket and win games for the Pelicans when he's been on the floor. In the playoffs, you got to have that guy. And so I think that when you look at that, you put that in the computer. You say, do we have an outside shooter? And that becomes Trey. Do you have a team first guy? And that becomes Herb. But the question that everybody knows that the Pelicans don't have, the things that they don't have, is a legitimate presence in the front court, either at power forward or center. Because if you play Zion there, he's not a power forward, really. So let's say you're playing him more often at the 3, which it seems like the Pelicans want to do. So if you're playing Zion at 3, you still need a 4 and a 5 that you can really count on. Yves Missi, even if he improves, I don't think he improves to the level where he becomes a defensive stopper next season. I think he can be better, but I don't think physically he's going to be ready for that. It takes centers a little time unless you're Dikembe Mutombo or Alonzo Mourning or Shaq, as far as just coming in and being, or Donovan Clingan even. But it generally takes, if you're not 7 foot and strong, it's a lot harder to make an impact defensively. And I think that's where Yves Missi is. So you also know you may not have a point guard, which also impacts how you evaluate these guys, because if they're playing without a point guard, someone to handle the basketball and make decisions, that impacts the quality of everybody's game. Some players have to do more, some players end up doing less because there's not somebody to distribute the basketball. So if you're the Pelicans, when you're looking at all these things, how do you make that decision quickly? Again, we have 6 years of data. Joe Dumars has 6 weeks of looking around and figuring out what this team is about. And it doesn't matter if you watched them from a distance. You've not, as Joe Dumars has said, you've not talked to any of these people and understood what the underlying issues are. And if you're making that decision, any executive should be making that decision from what they know and what from they see, as long as they're taking in information from trusted people and it's accurate. So I think that there is a potential for paralysis for the Pelicans of not making the right move this offseason, but that's always there. I think there will be moves, but I don't see, and I've said this before, and I think folks will probably agree with me, I don't see a major restructuring happening in this offseason. There will be change. There's always change, but I don't see a major restructuring happening in this offseason. All right, as we look forward to the draft, again, I think what folks have heard is that the Pelicans are interested in being aggressive and moving up for this draft. And since last week, when this first kind of surfaced, I have been of the mind that I don't want to see the Pelicans be aggressive to move up to 3. Like, I just don't understand the aggression to move up to 3, even if you're really in love with Ace Bailey, even if that's who you really love. He doesn't seem to be somebody that everybody covets. And I think he can drop in the draft to where you have to maybe give up less to get at 5 or 6 and still get your guy if you want to move up at all, because I think that those players are still available. And if you're the Pelicans, what you need is somebody to fill those responsibilities, because the center may be out there in the draft. The point guard is not. But you need a couple of things. You need shooting, right? You need ball handling, and you need defensive stoppers, particularly on the back end of your defense. So I'd almost, again, prefer, even to standing pat, I'd prefer the Pelicans to find a way to get 2 picks, because if you can stay in the top 10 by moving back, or stay in the lottery by moving back and pick up an additional second rounders or an additional first rounder, I think that's a better value for the Pelicans this year, because there is not, outside of Cooper Flag, and I don't even know if Dylan Harper is that guy. I think Dylan Harper can be an all-star level player maybe, but I don't think he's the franchise changing player that fans may want at that type of draft position. So if he's not that, then let me find players who can come in and fill needs for me. And I think that the Pelicans, it's come down to a few prospects in particular, and we keep coming back to the same 3. It's either Con Knipple, it's Ace Bailey, Common Malawak, and then also I'd throw in Jeremiah Fears, though there is some possibility that Fears could go higher than 7. All of these guys are imperfect. None of them are finished products. But when you look at a Con Knipple, you feel like he's a plug and play player from day one, that you can find a way to put him on the court and he won't be a problem at 6'6", shooting 40% from 3, plays good defense, handles the basketball in the pick and roll, and can make assists, doesn't turn the ball over a ton. You can plug and play that guy. Ace Bailey, if you're looking at him at 6'7", he's got to be able to put the ball on the court, but you're looking at him to kind of outscore teams. It makes you put more of an onus on moving CJ if you're taking Ace Bailey, because you've got to give him those minutes. You've got to give him looks. You got to give him touches. Is his floor as high as what his ceiling projects? Because everybody has his ceiling as super high, but is Ace Bailey's floor high enough? And do you have the infrastructure in place with the Pelicans to make that work? The same as if you move up for Dylan Harper, I think you put him in the same category as a Con Knipple. It's not going to be perfect when you put Dylan Harper on the court, but at 6'6", he offers you size and shot creation as a point guard. He can play off the ball. He can play on the ball. And, he gives you positional flexibility and decision-making with the basketball. So he feels a need for you. If you take Common Malawak, he feels a need for you. He can move. He can play offense. He can play better than what he showed at Duke. And he could be an elite defender along the levels of a Rudy Gobert. If you're getting that type of player, that's absolutely an instant impact for you. And if you're trying to play two bigs, if you're trying to have multiple bigs on your roster in order to compete with some of the size in the NBA, it doesn't hurt you to have Common Malawak and Yves Missi. So those guys could all come in and impact the team. Now, Jeremiah Fears becomes one of those players when you talk about shooting for a higher upside, but that requires a long-term plan. For a guy who's, I think, the second youngest player in the draft and who struggles with things like his long-distance shooting, like his decision-making, are the Pelicans the right environment for a player like that? And I think that question fuels a lot more of your draft issues than anything else, because it doesn't matter how talented the player is. If you don't have a plan in place, and if you don't have an understanding of what they're going to do when they come in, what role you expect them to finish, and you don't put the kind of supports and training there, then you're going to fail no matter who you take. And I hate to keep beating that drum, but that's the biggest concern when you talk about the Pelicans. Is whomever you draft. And if you're taking multiple swings at this, you take it, or however you want to say it, multiple bites of the apple. And I believe that the Pelicans should, because I think that there are players of value later in the first round who are not huge fall offs from the folks who are going to go top 11, who can still fulfill needs and who can give you the kind of depth that you need to find to replace some of these guys that are on your bench who just don't make sense anymore. So if you're the Pelicans, you do that, I think you're in a decent position. But if you don't have these things in place, and that's why the Willie Green thing is more frustrating than anything else, it's that it feels like it's an impediment to every move because you have no idea about Willie Green's future. If you felt that he was secure, you could plan for that as an organization. If you feel like if he got fired, you'd be with a new coach and putting in a new plan together. But with Willie in this limbo of them bringing him back, but you having no idea whether he's secure, whether he's going to be in New Orleans for the long haul, or whether he's going to get fired 10 games into the season, it messes everything up. And that inability to be decisive with Willie Green and even retaining him doesn't feel like a decisive measure. It feels like Joe Dumars was kind of forced into this. That is a sword of Damocles hanging over this organization. When does Willie Green's future get decided? Is it in New Orleans? Is it somewhere else? And how soon does that day come? As long as that's the case, you have a coach in the meantime who has shown no um, joy in playing young players, in creating systems for them to succeed. And you can lose young players quickly, whether by talent or whether by disposition, if you do not create a system for them to thrive. Man, it's just a couple minutes here and there. It's having one or two plays for that guy. And you're not getting veterans on the Pelicans getting plays tailored to their talents. So if that's the case, that will remain a concern after the draft, into summer league, and into the start of the regular season. Because unless you thrust one of these guys into the spotlight due to an injury concern, or they're just so impressive this offseason, and I don't know how that'll be the case. Because again, the only rookies we've seen play for the Pelicans is because there was nobody else to put in that position. There was nobody else left to play, so Willie had to play the rookie. It wasn't an intent to start Herb Jones. It wasn't an intent to play Trey Murphy heavy minutes as a rookie. It wasn't an intent to play Yves Missi heavy minutes last year. It was a project at 21, and he was going to sit the bench. It wasn't an intent to play any of these guys outside of Zion Williamson. He's the only rookie that was drafted by the Pelicans who was supposed to play from day one. And yes, it's harder than ever, but when you're making a decision in 3 years over who that player is, you can't waste a year with a lack of planning and a lack of foresight and a lack of training. Pelicans cannot waste a year of that. You have to get something from those players every year in order to find out whether or not you're going to make a long-term commitment from them. You got to get something. It doesn't have to be 82 games. It doesn't have to be 10 minutes a night, but you have to have regular contributions from that player. And during the regular season, when you're a team that plays 10 or 11 players, to not play your first round pick makes no sense. So we'll see the Pelicans are with that. But it's just that Willie Green decision continues to haunt the Pelicans. It just feels like it is holding everything up. And until they rectify that, whether it's moving Willie or trading Zion, if one of those two things are the major linchpins in the organization right now. They're the two things that are holding this team together. And if you pull them apart, and I'm not saying you have to hold this team together because it's great. I'm just saying that's the state of the team. Willie Green and Zion Williamson are the fulcrum of all your decision making. You're making decisions around those guys. Whether that's that's an intelligent decision for the long term, it remains to be seen. All right, that's going to do it for today. Back tomorrow, of course, and on Thursday. So drop your comments below. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you think it's time to trade Trey. Tell me if you think it's time to move on from Herb. Tell me where you think CJ is headed. Tell me who you think the Pelicans should draft and if they should move back in this draft. Let me know. So hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, share this show with somebody else. And until the next time, you can follow me on social media at DM Grubb, Instagram, Twitter. You can find me on Blue Sky. You can find me on TikTok. And so until the next time, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And this has been the Post Up with David Grubb. Y'all take it easy.